tell us your areas of particular interest. And why don't I start down at my far right with Senator Norman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Tommy Norman, country boy from James City County.
Lionel Spruill, statewide.
Good morning, Jeremy McPike, 29th District, Manassas, Prince William County.
Mamie Locke, 2nd District, Hampton, Newport News, York County, and Portsmouth.
Betsy Carr, Richmond, Virginia, 69th District.
Janet Howell, part of Northern Virginia.
Ken Plum, Reston in Fairfax County.
Lee Ware, Powhatan County, and I'm a retired history teacher.
Bobby Orrock, 54th District, Caroline, Spotsylvania counties.
Terry Alston, 19th House District, Allegheny, Botetourt, and Bedford County.
Barry Knight, Virginia Beach and Chesapeake.
Kathy Byron, Bedford, Campbell, Franklin, and part of the city of Lynchburg.
Tony Wilt, 26th House District, city of Harrisonburg, and a portion of Rockingham County.
Great, thank you. And now the staff.
Justin, you want to start?
My name is Justin Brown. I'm one of the 3 associate directors of JLARC.
Tracy Smith, one of the 3 associate directors. Kimberly Sarte, the 3rd associate director.
We've got our project leaders here. We'll let them just run down and introduce themselves too. Stephanie?
Hi, I'm Stephanie Hacks. I'm a project leader. I'm Lauren Axel, also project leader.
Drew Dickinson, I'm a project leader. Mark Ribbon, also project leader. Jamie Bitts, I work with JLARC's ongoing oversight of ERS, Virginia 529, VITA.
Ellen Miller, and I'm the lead analyst for economic development.
Joe McMahon, the final project leader.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all, and I look forward to us all working very well together over the next couple of years and to be as productive as JLARC always is. And now I'd like to recognize Delegate Austin to nominate the vice chair.
Madam Chair, thank you so much. I would like to nominate Delegate Orrick as the vice chair, please.
Are there further nominations?
Where is he from? Oh, okay, thank you.
Could I have a motion to close the nominations? Moved and seconded that the nominations be closed. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Looking forward to working with you, Delegate Orrick.
Thank you, Madam.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Hal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Congratulations on your election.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, at this time, I'd like to give you a brief overview of the agenda. Each May, we provide you with a report on legislative actions pursuant to JLARC reports, which I'll present in a moment. Senator Howell held up the report a minute ago. In May, it's also practice to present to you our work plan for the year for your approval, which we will present this morning. And then finally, this morning, the Auditor of Public Accounts and her team will present their work plan for approval and update you on the results of some of the work that they're doing. The auditor serves on the commission as an ex officio non-voting member. APA staff are not part of JLARC. However, the code directs the commission shall serve in an advisory role to the APA, and that the APA may from time to time conduct special studies and fiscal reviews for the commission. Through this relationship, it has been practice for the commission to approve the APA's work plan each year. Madam Chair, at this time, I would like to present the report on legislative actions in response to JLARC report findings and recommendations. Once again, the studies that you asked us to conduct have led to a substantial number of legislative recommendations, and there's been strong follow-through by this commission and the General Assembly to act on these recommendations through legislation. A great deal of this legislative work has been done by members of this commission through specific bills, as well as the pending Appropriation Act. The JLARC study with the most legislative activity this year was the review of the Virginia Employment Commission and its unemployment insurance program. As you're all aware, the experience of the pandemic and the JLARC review revealed significant shortcomings in Virginia's unemployment insurance program that needed to be addressed, and the General Assembly took strong action to address those shortcomings. Along with the pending Appropriation Act, Senate Bill 219, patroned by Senator McPike, and HB 270, patroned by Delegate Byron, addressed all of the key legislative recommendations made by JLARC and should help to substantially strengthen the unemployment insurance program and help to avoid a repeat of the last 2 years. One of the biggest, have the slides on? There they go. One of the biggest frustrations that I know you all experienced assisting your constituents was the lack of adequate communication and support and assistance provided to claimants. This is directly addressed through the legislation. VEC is directed to make their forms and other documents used to communicate with the public readable and understandable. The legislation creates an Office of Ombudsman to assist individuals with the appeals process and unemployment compensation process in general. And the legislation directs VEC to regularly solicit input from claimants and employers about the unemployment insurance IT system and use that feedback to improve it. The legislation also addresses increasing the efficiency of the system. Legislative action taken will streamline the process for challenging denials of claims based on monetary eligibility. It will also increase efficiency by allowing VEC to require employers to submit employee separation reports electronically. VEC was estimated to have made at least $1.2 billion in incorrect payments between 2020 and the first half of 2021. Through the legislation you passed, VEC is required to conduct a full eligibility review of suspicious or improper claims, to begin collecting all improper payments, and to take actions to prevent future improper payments, such as requiring the electronic submission of employer separation reports. One of the most significant shortcomings that was revealed by the pandemic and the JLARC study was the glaring lack of planning and preparation on the part of VEC or the state for such an emergency. In addition, VEC was very slow to increase staff to match the substantial increase in claims and reported many impediments to trying to do so. The legislation enacted requires VEC to develop and maintain a resiliency plan for effectively responding to periods of high unemployment. And the Appropriation Act directs the Department of Human Resource Management to convene a work group to determine what can be put in place to help agencies that are required to quickly increase staff size in times of emergency. There were many JLARC recommendations made directly to VEC, and there are many improvements and matters that need to be addressed at VEC and in the unemployment insurance program. And it'll be important for the General Assembly to monitor progress over the next few years. Senate Bill 219 and House Bill 270 create a subcommittee of the Commission on Unemployment Insurance to provide the needed legislative oversight. Madam Chair, another major JLARC study from 2021 was on the state's Guardianship and Conservatorship program. As with the unemployment insurance program, we found many shortcomings, and there was a good follow-through by the General Assembly, though there do remain significant issues that will hopefully be addressed in future sessions. Senator McPike's SB 514 addressed several of the key JLARC recommendations. One of the critical aspects of the guardianship process is the preparation of a report for the court by a guardian ad litem, which serves as the primary basis for the judicial decisions regarding guardianship. Two important matters on which a guardian ad litem provides a recommendation to the court are whether the adult at issue needs counsel and whether a less stringent alternative than guardianship might address the adult's needs. Under previous law, guardian ad litems were not required to support their reasons for their recommendations on these two key matters, even though judges rely heavily on them. SB 514 now requires the guardian ad litem to do so. The review also found that family members or friends are often not aware of their right to contest the proposed guardian in court. The legislation you passed requires that the notice of a guardianship hearing directly indicate that the family members and friends have a right to become a party to the proceeding, and that as parties to the proceeding, they have the right to propose an alternative guardian if they believe one would be better suited for the role. One of the most concerning findings from our review is that private guardians are not required to visit the adults under their guardianship in person on a regular basis, and that some, in fact, never conduct an in-person visit. The legislation you enacted directs the formation of a work group to study visitation requirements for private guardians. One of the key mechanisms for ensuring that private guardians are properly fulfilling their role is the annual report that they're required to prepare. The review found that the reports were not designed to adequately protect adults under guardianship. Senate Bill 514 substantially strengthens the report requirements, improves the information provided, and will help to ensure that private guardians are adequately fulfilling their role. And finally, legislation passed requires a periodic review to ensure public guardian program caseload standards make sense, and requires financial institutions to give adult protective services staff access to financial records when investigating suspected adult abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation. Turning to K through 12, one of the most significant recommendations from the JLARC review of the Department of Education in 2020 was the need to strengthen the state's school improvement program, which is carried out by DOE's Office of School Quality. The mission of the program is to provide much-needed assistance to low-performing and struggling schools. The study found that the program was significantly understaffed to effectively fulfill its mission. The pending Appropriation Act will provide important additional funding to hire more staff, which should help the program to perform effectively. One of the findings from our review of transportation funding and infrastructure last year was the need to foster the development of a user-based system to raise transportation revenue in the future. The JLARC review found that the long-term success of Virginia's voluntary mileage-based user fee program will require that privacy concerns be addressed. SB 237, patroned by Senator McPike, allows for participants in the program to prevent the state from tracking their vehicle's location, and the bill limits the use of data collected to what is necessary to administer the program. In 2021, JLARC conducted a review of VITA's organization and structure. Two of the key findings from that review were that VITA needed more IT security staff, and that VITA had contractors doing jobs that should be performed by full-time VITA staff. You have directly addressed both issues through the pending Appropriation Act. The Act provides for 11 additional IT security staff and gives VITA authority in for 8 additional full-time staff positions so the contractors can be replaced with full-time employees. In 2020, JLARC conducted a review of the Department of Small Business and Supplier Diversity. One of the findings from that review was that the department could and should do more to support the SWAM process. HB 814, patroned by Delegate Torian, directs the department to provide more direct support and feedback to agencies in the development of their SWAM plans. The law directs the department to work directly with individual agencies on SWAM strategies to help them achieve their SWAM goals, and directs the department to research and publish effective strategies for achieving SWAM spending. And finally, Madam Chair, one of the recommendations from our review of transportation economic development incentives last year was that it would be prudent to narrow eligibility for the aircraft parts repair exemption to better target the incentive to business aircraft and not those for personal use. HB 462, patroned by Delegate Austin, does that by limiting the exemption's availability to aircraft that are 2,400 pounds or more. Madam Chair, that concludes my presentation of legislative impacts. I would like to note that in the fall, it's the practice to provide members of this commission with a list of the unimplemented JLARC legislative recommendations so that you may consider those as you consider legislation for the upcoming session. That's all I have on this. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions?
Madam Chairman.
Yes, Senator Norman.
Hal, in recent weeks, I had the opportunity to be with an upper-level employee at the Virginia Employment Commission, and we had some very candid discussions that probably are not reflected in the succinct presentation that has been made. Did you all look at the technological equipment that they have, and particularly their computer system, and whether it was currently dated or whether it was going the way of the Yorktown Antique Shop?
Well, during our review, Madam Chair and Senator Norma, one of the things we looked at was the modernization project, which was to modernize the IT system. And it was underway and finishing up right as we finished our work last fall. And we think and hope that system is going to make things a lot better. But we understand that they've identified many flaws in the current system that need to be worked through, and that they're still not across the finish line with the new system. But we haven't been regularly following how that's going since we finished our work. But hopefully that'll be something that this Oversight Subcommittee will do as they do their work. But Tracy, do you have anything to add to that? Tracy oversaw our work in this area. Okay.
Madam Chairman, I appreciate the explanation, and we all have aspirations of things improving. A little bit different area, but still at VEC. Since the pandemic situation and just the barrage of complaints that everyone was receiving about payments, how many either part-time or full-time employees have they brought on?
Tracy, can you respond to that?
Madam Chair, Senator Norman, I might have to bring up Lauren Axel, who is the project leader for that study, for exact numbers, and I doubt she knows them off the top of her head. Since we completed that review, we haven't been tracking that. My understanding is that rather than bring on new employees, since the change in the administration, they have repurposed existing employees to focus on areas that are of greatest concern and kind of the highest priority. I'm sure they have brought on some part-time and full-time employees, but I don't know the count of that.
Madam Chairman, I look forward to hearing from Ms. Axel on how many folks they are, FTEs and part-time. No, not right now. If you don't know, that's fine.
We can follow up with you, Senator, on that. Have to.
All right, any further questions? Okay, I think this first report that we got demonstrates how effective this commission can be with good information and also working in a nonpartisan way. If you were listening, I think on every bill, it was with a Republican and a Democratic chief sponsors. And I think that's proven to be very successful over the years. And I hope we're going to be able to continue that.
Absolutely, thank you. Next, Madam Chair, is presentation of the JLARC work plan for the year. This plan lays out the work we've been directed to do for the current calendar year. Our work is underway on all the studies, and we will begin to present the findings from our review starting at the June meeting of the Commission. You'll now hear from the 3 associate directors who oversee the work of the agency, as well as the project leaders and analysts who are leading this work. They will provide you with a brief overview of the studies that we're undertaking. Please feel free to weigh in if you have questions, thoughts, or suggestions as we go with this presentation. With that, I'd like to introduce Senior Associate Director Justin Brown. Justin?
Thank you, Al. Good morning again. There are 3 projects that I'll be supervising this year. Hopefully they're on their way up. So we've got 2 related to K-12, and I'll bring the 2 project leaders up in a moment to talk to you about those. We've got one related to the income tax that I will give an overview for you of that to start off with. It's myself, our methodologist, Derek Beecroft, and our Chief Quantitative and Economic Development Analyst, Ellen Miller, who are doing this work, and we're going to brief this to you in September. The 2021 General Assembly passed a joint resolution directing us to study ways to make the state's individual income tax more progressive. It directs us reviewing, taking a look at the brackets and the rates and any credits, deductions, and exemptions to find ways to make the tax more progressive. Now, as most of you probably know, a progressive tax is essentially one in which you pay more as a share of your income as your income rises. Proponents of progressive taxation cite the fact that higher income filers have more money overall and therefore have a greater ability to pay higher taxes than lower income filers. Those of you who were on JLARC last year might remember, I think it was at the October meeting, we gave you an interim presentation and pointed out a variety of things about the income tax. I just wanted to remind you of a few of those here this morning. When you apply that definition of progressivity, Virginia's income tax is progressive. Individual income tax is progressive because the share of income that you pay goes up as your income rises. But Virginia's income tax is less progressive than the average state. It's also considerably less progressive than the federal income tax, which is the case with all state income taxes, so that's not surprising at all. Another brief piece of background in terms of why this matters so much. The individual income tax typically accounts for about 70 to 75% of all general fund revenue. So changes to that tax can have a big impact on general fund revenue collection. So just briefly in terms of the study issues here, as I alluded to, we'll be characterizing the progressivity of the income tax using a variety of comparisons and different types of measures. The bulk of our work is turning out to be the last 2 issues there on the slide, which are to identify changes the state could consider to make the income tax more progressive and what the effect of those changes would be. A quick note about the changes that we're going to identify. How to approach taxation is a policy decision left up to the legislature. So we're not going to make any recommendations necessarily on what changes to make, but we will have a list of options that you could consider, and we'll give you detail on how each option would work, the revenue effect of that, and how the effective tax rates would change for low, middle, and upper income filers. The last slide I have is just a listing of the major research activities we're doing here. The one thing I do need to do is thank Virginia Tax for their cooperation on this project. They've actually given us access to the same model that they use to look into the effect of changing the income tax. And so we're going to use that model to assess the impact of each of these options. And that's going to make it easier down the road during the legislative session, for example, if there's interest in implementing any of these particular changes. But before I turn the podium over, I'd be happy to take any questions or comments about this particular project.
Are there questions?
Madam Chairman.
Yes, Senator Norman.
I was delighted to hear that you may provide a list of options. And in the resurrection of Steve Forbes, have you looked at what a flat tax paid by every citizen would generate in revenues as opposed to a more progressive tax?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. We have noticed over the last couple or 3 years that there's been a bit of a trend in other states. North Carolina has had a flat tax for a while. I believe Georgia's in the process of moving towards that. So we've talked about that as a team, and I think we could include something like that in the report if you'd be interested in it. What I will say is that a flat tax, when you think about progressivity, if you charge everybody at every income level the same rate, that's not a progressive tax. But what some places do, and I think North Carolina does this, for example, there's a lot of deductions at the lower end that have the effect of bringing down what people at the lower middle income level pay. So I think that's something we could provide some commentary on, with the caveat that conceptually, I think definitionally, flat taxes tend to not be progressive. But there is a conversation about that nationwide. So if we can provide some information on that, if that would be useful.
Madam Chairman, different question that has some volatility associated with it.
Okay.
You just mentioned that deductions can have a favorable impact on lower income folks by reducing it. Have you looked at what raising the double standard deduction would do as far as helping lower income?
Well, it's interesting. We are monitoring this kind of discussion as it goes through. And the way that the model works is you can plug in the different changes. And one of the kind of, I think, mathematical facts about the way taxes work is that anything that is in dollar terms, if it is increased, it tends to benefit lower income people more. So you could, just for conversational purposes, literally take anything in the Virginia income tax that is right now in dollar terms and increase that. And just mathematically, it will benefit lower income people more than higher income people. Conversely, that'll work the other way if you do things on the higher end of the spectrum. Just this wasn't exactly what you asked, but there are things that can be done to phase out or limit certain exemptions, credits, or deductions that are given for higher income people, and that would have the effect of raising more revenue and increasing what they pay. So the math on that works in both directions.
Further questions? Okay.
If there's no other questions or comments about that, I'd like to turn it over to Joe McMahon, who's going to talk to you about a review of the effects of the pandemic on the K-12 system.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Justin. As Justin said, I'm Joe McMahon, the project leader for our review of the impact of COVID-19 on public K-12 education. Working alongside me on this study will be 3 analysts, Christine Wolf, Nick Galvin, and Kate Hopkins. Study resolution directs us to conduct a wide review of the impact of the pandemic on the state's public education system. This includes changes to student enrollment and how that affects funding, how the restrictions to face-to-face learning impacted student achievement, achievement gaps, and student well-being, how school staffing levels have changed, importantly, identifying strategies that can be put into place to address student learning loss, and finally, a look at school preparedness to return to remote instruction if needed in the future. The pandemic has been extremely disruptive to public education operations, its students, and its staff. In March of 2020, instruction shifted from in-person to remote and stayed that way for all divisions for the remainder of the year. Last school year, stretching from 2020 to 2021, we saw a mixture of modes of instruction across divisions, This ranged from those that were fully remote to those that were fully in person, while many others were in between, using a hybrid model which incorporated both aspects. To add to that, many divisions switched their method for delivery of instruction at some point during the year. Finally, school divisions have used mostly in-person instruction during the current 21-22 school year, but remote or hybrid models have been used for quarantining purposes. These differences to modes of instruction, along with other factors related to the pandemic, have raised concerns about increases to pre-existing academic achievement gaps and potential negative effects to the mental health and well-being of students. Likewise, teachers and other school staff saw pretty dramatic changes to the way they perform their job, which raised concerns about workforce morale, recruitment and retention, and interest in remaining in the profession. We've broken our study and research into 6 key issue areas. We'll assess how the pandemic affected public school enrollment and attendance, how it has affected student academic achievement, mental health, and well-being, what steps can be taken to address those impacts, especially related to achievement gaps. On the staffing side, we'll look at how the pandemic affected working conditions, staffing levels, as well as steps that can be taken to address challenges with morale, recruitment, and retention. And finally, we'll examine how schools could be better prepared for future disruptions to in-person learning. Some of our key research activities will include interviews with school division staff and experts, extensive analysis of data related to student achievement and division staffing, a survey of school staff about the effects of the disruptions, as well as strategies for addressing the impacts on students and staff, a review of existing research, and to identify lessons learned to better ensure preparedness in the future. I'll conclude that we're very aware that school staff have had many demands on their time the past few years, so we're going to work to conduct our research in a way to not overburden them with requests for interviews or information. And one of the ways we're doing that is by relying on the existing comprehensive data collection and surveying that VDOE is already doing. And that being said, we will be sure to gather school staff input as needed to fully address the study resolution. I can pause there for questions.
Thank you. Are there questions for Joe?
Madam Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, if I may, I would just, 2 suggestions or comments, if y'all could incorporate them. One would be, if y'all could, as a part of your analysis, see, were there changes in per pupil costs, either positive or negative, during this time frame? And additionally, if we could garner information relative to technology limitations, I think this is going to be more of a factor in some of the more rural divisions, but use this opportunity as you're getting data from the school divisions to see were there disparate impacts on the local school divisions in trying to meet the needs of the students because of technology problems.
Absolutely. Madam Chair, Delegate Orrock, yep, note taken on the pupil costs and on the technology piece. DOE has actually started a new data collection this year about broadband access and access to devices. So we're going to gather that as well as do interviews and really look at that technology component as it relates to these factors on impacts to students.
And Madam Chairman, and
Yes.
kind of follow up on the per pupil costs, I think we may gather some information here that will prove there were certain efficiencies that were achieved during this process that we can continue going forward in the more normal school setting, shall we say. So I'm not saying this will all necessarily be a negative. We may get some positive information from this.
Got it.
Yes, Delegate Ware, and then Delegate Knight.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One question that occurs to me is what was the experience of other states? I don't see anything in the language that we have here. The laboratories of democracy that are each of the separate states, certainly they were disparate in their approach to this, and there may be some from whom we could gain lessons outside the Commonwealth.
Madam Chair, Delegate Ware, you're right, that wasn't in the slide, but we will be looking at that. There are specifically some national tests that different states take, and there's national comparisons. So at least from a testing and quantitative look at the academic impact, we'll be able to see that. And then we are reaching out to education experts across the country, the National Commission on Education of the states. So we will know that. And then two, for other states, are going to be a really good resource of strategies and practices going forward. See what other states have already implemented and where success seems to lie there.
Madam Chair, if I could just one follow-up.
Yes,
And I think you're exactly right. Certainly testing is one element where it goes across state lines. It seems to me that the mental health and other social outcomes that are harder to quantify also may be, again, varied between the different states, and that would be of interest, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, to the extent possible with those qualitative measures in mental health, we will try to draw that comparison as well.
Thank you.
Delegate Knight.
Madam Chairman, as you are well aware, we've got a budget amendment in on a component of this on what COVID had on school attendance. So if you'll look at it as Delegate Byron's budget amendment, so when you're looking at, I think you said a Senate resolution, maybe you can incorporate that in there too. If we look favorably on that budget amendment, we're going to have some money, you know, in that component of it.
Thank you.
Any other question? I don't see any, so continue.
Thank you all. That concludes my presentation for today. I'll turn it over to Mark Gribben to discuss the other ongoing K-12 education study.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. As Joe said, I'm Mark Gribben. I'm heading up the team looking at K-12 funding with a focus on the standards of quality, or SOQs. Our team includes Sarah Burde-Sachs, Sam Leisman, and Mitch Perry. This is a multi-year study, and we plan to give you a status update in December with the final report completed in 2023. Our resolution directs us to look at the cost of education and its implications for SOQ funding. We're specifically required to look at how much funding is needed to meet actual expenses and how funding has changed since the Great Recession of 2009. We're also directed to propose changes to the funding formula. For background, the main way the state funds public education is through the SOQ formula. That formula is very complex and takes into account a number of host of factors, excuse me. Some of those key factors are the number of teachers and staff that each school division is required to have, the cost of their salaries and benefits, and each local government's ability to pitch in funding. The SOQ formula allocated $6.6 billion in state funds to school divisions the last fiscal year. That was 85% of state direct aid to public education. The SOQs also require a minimum local contribution, and in practice, nearly all localities contribute more than their minimum. For example, last year, the average local contribution was 74% more than required, and only 10 of 132 divisions were really even close to that minimum amount. This slide shows the trend in per-pupil education funding from all sources. Each of these bars is a fiscal year, starting with fiscal 09 on the left, and then 10, 15, and 20. The first thing I would point out is that you can see funding dropped significantly from 09 to 10 due to fallout from the Great Recession. Funding gradually increased after that, but if you look at that little line that we have on the top there, you can see that fiscal 20 funding still trailed 09 after adjusting for inflation. The takeaway here is that for more than a decade, the funding for education has trailed its previous peak back in 09. The second thing I would point out is the majority of education funding actually comes from local sources, which are shown in the dark blue bars at the bottom. That local funding has been fairly consistent over the years. For example, looking back in 2010, the local funding amount did not drop by near as much as the state amount did. There are several issues we'll be looking at under this study. First, we want to look at if the staffing requirements set forth in the SOQs reflect the actual practices of the school divisions and best practices for education. Second, does the SOQ formula accurately estimate the costs that school divisions incur to meet their required staffing and support standards? Third, does the state effectively direct its funds based on local ability to pay and student needs? For example, is more state money provided to divisions that are fiscally distressed, and is there more funding made available for students with disabilities? Fourth, are school divisions adequately but not excessively funded? And here we're looking at the total funding that each division gets from all of the sources. Fifth, how could state education funding, including SOQ and other programs, be changed to better direct state dollars and address any gaps in school division funding? We have a fair amount of work planned for this study. We'll be interviewing subject matter experts, including central office staff at school divisions across the state, and reviewing research literature related to education funding. We'll be looking at staffing data to see how actual staffing compares to SOQ standards, and we'll be convening a series of professional judgment panels with school division staff to help identify staffing needs. And those panels will include principals, teachers, and other school-level personnel. We will also take a very close look at the current SOQ funding formula, including how it is constructed and all of the data and assumptions that go into it. For example, we'll examine the salary and benefit assumptions that the state uses, as well as the local composite index, which is used to determine state and local funding shares. We will also perform several analyses that use statistical methods to estimate education funding needs. These will be done alongside some of our other methods, and with the goal of developing several independent estimates of what amount of education funding is needed. We will also compare Virginia's funding approach to other states and best practices. And finally, we will work with DOE to estimate how any potential changes would affect both state and local funding obligations, as well as the amount of total funding that each of the Commonwealth school divisions receives. Madam Chair, I'll pause here in case you have any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, Delegate Byron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, are you going to, along with your comparisons here, I don't see it actually listed, but are you going to also compare academic performance with the funding? I mean, I see a lot about funding, but you don't have anything that shows your outcomes of their academic achievement in those.
Madam Chair, Delegate Byron, we will be looking at that and when we're doing these cost estimates. So there's several methods that you can use to estimate costs, and they all take into account to some greater or lesser extent the outcomes that are being achieved. So for example, one of the statistical methods I mentioned, you are specifically tying funding amount to if there is a good outcome being achieved. So that is part of the analysis that we're conducting.
Yes, Delegate Wilk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On slide 18, how did you arrive at the 74% figure?
Sorry, let me go back to that one, make sure I have the right number, Delegate. Madam Chair, Delegate Wilk, the number there is based on the local required local match reports that localities or that are submitted by DOE to the General Assembly every year. And so if you look in those reports, it will tell you how much each locality reported spending above what was required by SOQs, as well as what was required above any match programs that they participate in. So for example, if they participate in an at-risk funding program, there's a local match on top of that. And so all that gets accounted for, and then the amount of money that is spent above that is that percentage, and we just averaged all the percentages.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Up next is Tracy Smith.
Thanks, Mark. Madam Chair, members of the Commission. Good morning again. These are the 4 studies that are under my supervision this year. These are all Commission-directed studies that were approved by the Commission last year. The first is a continuation of our study of affordable housing needs in the Commonwealth that we reported to you in December. And that specifically is looking at the performance of Virginia Housing, which is formerly known as the Virginia Housing Development Authority, or VHDA. We're also looking at the advantages and disadvantages of consolidating legal forms of gaming under a single state agency or fewer state agencies that are currently involved in regulating gaming. We're looking at higher education financial aid and how the different, the 15 four-year institutions are distributing and using state financial aid funding that they receive. And Delegate Austin had also asked us as part of that study to look at the cost of dual enrollment. And so we've incorporated that into that study as well. Finally, Madam Chair, we're reviewing the state's community behavioral health system, focusing specifically on the 40 community services boards. And I will go ahead and turn the podium over to Stephanie Papps, who's our project leader for the Virginia Housing Study and our study of gaming regulation.
Good.
Good morning, Madam Chair, board members of the Commission. As Tracy said, my name is Stephanie Papps, and I'm the project leader for the review of Virginia housing. Ellie Rigsby is also working with me on this study. This study of Virginia housing is the continuation of the affordable housing study that we briefed to you in December of last year. This concluding portion of the study focuses just on Virginia housing and its operations and effectiveness. We plan to brief this study to the Commission at next month's June meeting. Virginia Housing is an independent state authority that acts as a bank for funding affordable housing. It provides financing for multifamily rental developments and single-family home loans. On the multifamily rental development side, Virginia Housing provides loans through tax-exempt and taxable bonds, as well as administering the state's low-income housing tax credit, or LIHTC. On the single-family side, Virginia Housing provides home loans to low and middle-income households purchasing a home. Virginia Housing also provides down payment and closing cost assistance to certain borrowers. Virginia Housing receives no state general funds, and it generates revenue through its lending activities. The authority has over $3.7 billion in net assets and has produced over $100 million in net revenue annually for the past several years. The Virginia Housing Board of Commissioners allocates a portion of the authority's annual net earnings to a program called REACH. REACH is administered by Virginia Housing, and the funds are used for three broad categories of projects: expanding home ownership, developing additional affordable rental housing, and community outreach projects. Because Virginia Housing is the state's primary resource for addressing the state's housing needs and has a significant amount of discretionary funds for affordable housing, Virginia Housing's effectiveness is critical to addressing the state's current and future housing needs. This brief study will address three main issues. Is Virginia Housing appropriately managed? Is there appropriate oversight of Virginia Housing? And does Virginia Housing effectively manage its REACH program to stimulate the development of new affordable housing? This slide lists the research activities that our team will complete for this study. We have interviewed Virginia Housing staff, board members, and REACH grant recipients, conducted a survey of Virginia Housing staff, reviewed REACH grant applications and status reports, reviewed employee job description and HR policies, and observed board meetings and reviewed board meeting materials. I'll pause here for any questions about the review of Virginia Housing.
Are there questions? Yes.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, and I hope as a part of this, y'all will look at what other states are doing that may have similar types of programs that we could learn from that might benefit the Virginia Housing Project.
Madam Chair, yes. Well, we took a look at that to some extent in the December report, and I don't know, I think we'll address that a little bit as in terms of how other state housing development authorities use their earnings.
And Madam Chairman,
yes.
Just to follow and to the point, are other states using a model different from this that they're seeing greater effectiveness from? So.
Okay.
Any other question? Thank you.
Okay. All right. Next, I'll also be the project leader for a study of gaming regulation in Virginia. Ellie Rigsby will also be working with me on this study. We plan to brief this study to the Commission at the October meeting. The study resolution for the gaming regulation study was approved at the January 2022 meeting of the Commission. This study will assess the advantages and disadvantages of consolidating gaming regulation activities into a single state agency or fewer state agencies. Virginia has gradually expanded the types of gaming that are permitted in the state. Currently, Virginia has 6 types of legal and regulated gaming: lottery, charitable gaming, horse race wagering, which includes historical horse racing, sports wagering, casino gaming, and fantasy contests. These 6 forms of gaming are regulated by 3 different agencies. Lottery, sports wagering, and casinos are regulated by the Virginia Lottery. Horse race wagering is regulated by the Virginia Racing Commission, and charitable gaming and fantasy contests are regulated by the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, or VDACS. If the types of legal and regulated gaming continues to expand, the number of agencies involved could also increase. These 6 forms of gaming generated significant sales and wagering, at least $8.9 billion in fiscal year 21, and at least $900 million of that was designated for various public purposes, such as the Literacy Fund, Virginia Charities, the Virginia horse industry, and state and local taxes. To address the mandate for this study, the team plans to answer 4 main questions. What are the similarities and differences in Virginia's statutory and regulatory requirements for each form of legal gaming? What resources are needed to ensure compliance with the state's gaming laws? Are Virginia's gaming regulation efforts effective at preventing and discouraging unethical, criminal, or corrupt activity in the gaming industry? And what are the options for consolidating gaming regulation under fewer state agencies? This slide lists the research tasks that our team plans to complete for the study. We plan to interview gaming agency staff here in Virginia and in other states, interview gaming operators, review each gaming agency's data on staffing, workloads, and funding, compare licensing, inspection, and enforcement requirements and processes at each of the 3 state gaming agencies, and review gaming regulation requirements, processes, and policies in other states. That concludes my prepared remarks, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about the gaming study or the review of Virginia housing.
Thank you. Are there questions on either? I guess not.
All right. I'll turn it over to Lauren Excel to discuss the higher education study.
Good morning again, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. I'm Lauren Excel, and I'll be leading JLARC's review of financial aid and dual enrollment. The team for this study consists of myself, Brittany Utz, and Landon Weber. And as the title slide suggests, this study has 2 large and fairly distinct topics. Our team has separate research activities to address both over the next few months, with a planned briefing date in November. For student financial aid at Virginia's public 4-year institutions, our study resolution directs us to look at trends in key metrics such as student higher education costs and enrollment. And we will also be looking at the adequacy and equity of state financial aid funding across institutions, institutions' financial aid awarding policies and practices, whether financial aid has effectively lowered student costs, and how rising higher education costs, debt, and aid have affected students at Virginia's HBCUs in particular. For dual enrollment, our study resolution directs us to look at 2 main things: the costs incurred by community colleges and school divisions to operate dual enrollment courses, and how well higher education institutions share data for students with dual enrollment or transfer credits. You may recall that JLARC did an in-depth review of the community college system a few years ago in 2017 that assessed the quality and transferability of dual enrollment credits. Because of this, the bulk of our dual enrollment study effort this year will be related to program costs. To provide a bit of background on financial aid, there are various types of aid that help students enroll and continue in higher education. But the Virginia Student Financial Assistance Program is the state's primary financial aid program, serving about 32,000 students through $173 million in awards annually. VSFAP funding is largely allocated to public higher education institutions based on the financial needs of their student populations. Importantly, with the exception of a few broad parameters, each institution has the autonomy to establish their own strategy for awarding state aid to students. This results in different aid amounts and numbers of students receiving awards at each institution, as shown on the bottom of this slide. Over the next several months, our team will research the 4 study issues listed on slide 38, including how higher education costs, student financial need, enrollment, and student success have changed over time, whether the state's approach to allocating financial aid funding is effective and based on reasonable metrics and assumptions, whether Virginia's four-year institutions have effective aid awarding criteria, policies, and processes that maximize state dollars, and to what extent students at Virginia's public HBCUs have been disproportionately affected by rising higher education costs. Switching back to dual enrollment again, the key background information to understand here is that most dual enrollment courses, where high school students take courses to earn college credit, are offered through Virginia's community colleges. Student participation in dual enrollment has increased 55% in the last 10 years, and the tuition and fee charges for school divisions and students vary statewide. There are four main study issues that our team will research related to dual enrollment, including the cost that community colleges and school divisions incur to provide dual enrollment, whether dual enrollment tuition covers these costs, whether charges to students could be more consistent statewide, and whether data is available to track how dual enrollment credits are transferred to four-year institutions and applied towards their degree requirements. Slide 41 shows the various research activities we will complete for this study. The two things that I'd like to highlight for the sake of time are the team's planned analysis of student-level data on financial aid award amounts, debt, and remaining financial need. We will look at various cuts of this data, including by institution. Another key research activity will be the team's collection of data on dual enrollment tuition rates and program costs from community colleges and local school divisions statewide. I'll stop there in case there are any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions?
Madam Chairman.
Yes, Senator Norman.
I'll preface my questions by my historical comments that I make about higher ed, that the General Assembly needs to impose some constraints on higher education. I hope that you saw the article this morning about the stress and declining enrollment on community colleges with the exception of Northern Virginia. And one of the contributing factors that was recited in that article is the insatiable appetite of our public colleges and universities, particularly the Big Five, to increase their enrollment, which is having an impact on some of the other colleges, and it is also now impacting the community colleges, according to that article. Audit. My first question is, are you aware whether or not any of our public colleges and universities embed within their tuition financial aid as part of tuition that is then distributed to needy students, and whether or not that is disclosed to parents or families that are paying tuition?
Madam Chair, Senator Norman, I do believe that schools are including or at least projecting and calculating when they are going to use existing revenue to help fund student financial aid. So I believe that is part of the calculation. Our team is still getting up to speed on exactly how all of the mechanics work, given that there are a number of different ways that financial aid can be provided on the institution side. We know that there can be scholarships, some with tuition being waived, some that would come out of existing revenue sources, but all of that will be stuff that the team does look at as part of just understanding the broad financial picture of student financial aid at each of the 15 public 4 years.
Madam Chairman.
Yes, Senator Norman.
My question and my issue is whether or not embedded in tuition is financial aid that is a cross-subsidization in essence, and whether or not that is disclosed to the people who are paying it. Are they aware that part of that tuition may be then used for financial aid that higher education institution is determining how it is paid?
Madam Chair, Senator Norman, that is a good question, and we'd be happy to look at that disclosure piece in particular, just understanding if that is conveyed to the parents who are paying regular tuition.
And Madam
Yes.
Chairman, don't
Senator
you
Norman.
agree it would be helpful if we could see that by institution, public institution?
Madam Chair,
Is that a
Senator
yes?
Norman, we would be happy to look at that by institution.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Lauren, I had a question for you. I may have missed it, but I'm not seeing any reference to the Pell Grants in this. And there's been also reports in the press about wide variations in what's available. Are you going to be looking into that aspect?
Madam Chair, yes, we will be at least looking at a high level at the number of Pell Grant recipients at each institution, understanding that that is, again, how one of the many pieces of how institutions are packaging their financial aid. So we will be gathering data on by institution how many Pell Grant recipients there are and looking at trends over time on that piece as well as a number of other statistics over time.
Good, thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since Senator Norman has brought up things that are not directly related to financial aid, which is obviously the focus of your review, let me add one to that too. It seems to me financial aid is covering costs, some of which are extra academic. They are outside the fundamental purpose of higher education. Will you be reviewing things like academic or administrative and bureaucratic costs that have increased over time, and the share that these other costs have added to the burden that has to be placed on tuition or financial aid? Is that part of your review?
Madam Chair, Delegate Ware, we will be looking at a high level at trends in higher education costs over time. So seeing what that total cost of attendance is at each institution and how that breaks down into the various tuition fees that students end up paying. What we don't have planned for this current study is really digging into what's driving the various costs outside of financial aid. Given that we did a higher education study series a number of years ago, those studies did seek to answer that question, but this study is going to be more focused just on the financial aid piece. But we want to understand how those costs have changed and the trends in costs, because that does affect students' ability to access and afford higher education.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Orrick.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, on slide 40, the dual enrollment, I'm just going to make a suggestion that if you don't look at advanced placement offerings and costs, you're not going to be looking at the full picture, because school divisions frequently find themselves either offering AP classes or dual enrollment. And I would suggest, as a part of your data collection, try and find out what school divisions are committing to their AP class programs and costs the division themselves may pay or the students. And could those monies be better utilized in dual enrollment programs? And somewhat related to that, I don't think we're going to get a complete picture unless you also, as you're looking at whether colleges are accepting dual enrollment classes, if you don't also look at and how many folks taking AP classes are then finding that those are transferring to those credits at the university level. I mean, that comes down, an AP class, that all comes down to a test, and then the university may or may not recognize that they passed that. And so I think you've got to look at the two together, get a full appreciation and understanding of how dual enrollment can be more effective or not.
Madam Chair, Delegate Orrick, I appreciate you bringing up the AP piece of it, and that's something that I'm going to look at our Associate Director to weigh in on. Just given the size of our team, it's not something we had considered including in our data collection effort, but I'll defer to Tracy on that one.
Madam Chair, Delegate Orrick, we certainly recognize that most school divisions are offering both dual enrollment and AP, and for all the school divisions that we've talked to so far, they have compared and contrasted sort of the advantages, disadvantages, and different costs. What we're trying to do here is really understand the cost structure of dual enrollment specifically, because the original concern that I think led Delegate Austin to request for us to review this was that you have students and families paying different amounts of tuition across the state, sometimes within the same school division. And really, in order for us to weigh in on whether or not a uniform tuition rate or cost model is possible, we really have to break down in a very detailed way dual enrollment specifically. And so this is sort of a long way of saying that I don't know that we will be able to fully look at AP and the cost to school divisions of offering AP, as well as to look at the extent to which AP courses are being transferred to the four-year institutions in the same way that we plan to for dual enrollment. I think we can certainly have some commentary on that at the final report in November, but our goal is not really to evaluate the advantages and disadvantages of dual enrollment related to AP or other types of opportunities.
And Madam Chair, and,
Yes.
and I appreciate that and understand. I guess I'm just suggesting on the front end, as you're getting data from the school divisions, include a question about, how much money you're allocating to your AP classes and how is that spread out between the school division and the students, to recognize that these are potential monetary resources that could be utilized. And similarly, as best you can from their data at the guidance level, are these kids able to use those AP classes to get when they get to the college level or not?
Anyone else?
Madam Chair, may I?
Yes.
Madam Chair, I would
Tell
also
you
like for you to consider that there's an allocation made on a per-student basis to public education, and should not some of those dollars transfer to these students to help offset some of the cost for the dual enrollment? If you would just take a look at that, please. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay.
And if there are no other questions, I'll turn it over to Drew Dickinson to discuss the next study.
Morning.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. As Lauren mentioned, my name is Drew Dickinson, and I'll be leading our review of Virginia's Community Services Board system. And joining me on the study will be Kate Agnelli, Tess Henneregger, and Dylan Wild. And we plan to brief the results of our study to you in December. The resolution for this study directs us to review the structure and service delivery of Virginia's Community Services Board system. We've been directed to review the services that CSBs are required to provide, CSB staffing and funding, and the timeliness and effectiveness of CSB's behavioral health services. It also directs us to determine how, if at all, the existing structure of the Virginia's Community Services Board system could be improved. And as a bit of background, community services boards were established to serve as the single point of entry for Virginia's publicly funded community behavioral health and developmental services. They provide mental health, substance use disorder, and developmental disability services, and primarily serve low-income and uninsured Virginians. Local governments are required to either establish their own CSBs or partner with other local governments to participate in a multi-jurisdictional CSB. And there are currently 40 community services boards in Virginia. CSBs are required to provide 10 types of core services, and the number of core services that CSBs are required to provide have increased over the past 5 to 7 years. CSBs also play an important role in the use of state psychiatric hospital beds, as they are required to screen people prior to their admission, search for available beds at alternative facilities, and conduct discharge planning for hospital patients. And CSB crisis services can also help the need for hospitalization. As part of our study, we'll be reviewing how CSB consumers, services, funding, and outcomes have changed over time. We'll also be reviewing whether CSBs are being effectively overseen by the state. And our team plans to review the current CSB system structure to determine whether it's the most efficient and effective approach to delivering community-based behavioral health services. And within this system structure topic, we'll be looking at the advantages and disadvantages of additional regionalization, opportunities for greater collaboration with private providers, and how other states structure their community-based behavioral health services systems. We'll also be reviewing whether CSBs are effectively implementing crisis services, whether they are effectively and efficiently screening individuals prior to their admission to state psychiatric hospitals, and thoroughly searching for available beds at alternative facilities, as well as whether CSBs are conducting effective discharge planning. And slide 48 summarizes some of our planned research activities, and these include interviews with key stakeholders in Virginia and staff in other states and subject matter experts, analyses of data on CSB services, funding, and outcomes, and a statewide survey of CSB directors. And Madam Chair, that concludes my brief remarks, but I'm happy to take any questions the Commission may have.
Are there questions?
Yes, ma'am.
I know to look first at Senator Norman.
Well, I don't know, you just happen to have a couple of topics today that I'm interested in. Normally, I, am asleep over here in the corner. We talk about expanded services, and one of the things that I've been interested in about CSBs is the number of individuals that are being served and how that relates to a per capita cost. And really what triggered my interest in it was that provision within the casino gaming bill that provided for a distribution of a certain percentage of the state's proceeds to CSBs. And I am very concerned that lower income people have immediate access to the services that are being rendered. But I also have a concern if you would do a projected pro forma on how much money that casino funds could be that were directed to CSB, I think there is an opportunity for some unconstrained spending there, and I'd be interested if they're trying to morph some of it from services to bricks and mortars. So I would appreciate it, if you would take a look at that. And when we talk about expanded services, I'd be interested in how many folks they're serving right now.
Sure, we'll definitely be looking at the populations that they're serving, and we can look into the topic as well.
Any other questions?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Senator McPike.
I defer to the new vice chair.
Oh.
First, and
Delegate
I'll ask a
Thank
question
you,
after.
Senator. Yeah, just very briefly, in your research activities, I would just ask if on the analysis of the data, if y'all could provide that to us by each regional community services board so we can identify potential best management practices being done in certain areas, but also where the biggest problems are that we need to try and find a means to address.
Madam Chair, or I certainly would be happy to do that.
Okay. Senator McPike.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess looking through the study guidelines in the presentation, I'm just curious as to whether or not we can incorporate something around sort of staffing and recruitment and or compensation. I mean, anecdotally, I've heard some of the challenges across different CSBs, and just interesting how that impacts service delivery, if that's a part of the challenges. So I want to make sure there's a highlight. If through the collection of data, I think it'd be informative for us to know a little bit about how that impacts the model.
Madam Chair, Senator McPike, definitely the people who are doing the work on the front line are really important, and we'll make sure to incorporate analysis of both the staffing challenges that CSBs are facing, but also what the state could be doing, what the state could do to help that.
One of the continuing problems that we've had over the last many decades is the number of people with mental illness who are in our corrections system, in either jails or prisons. Is there any way you could analyze, are we making any progress toward getting them into community services instead?
Madam Chair, we can look into that, and I'm not sure off the top of my head what numbers are available, but we can certainly look into that. I know the CSBs play a role in helping to facilitate some behavioral services for those individuals, but we can look into that topic.
Yeah, it's a dual problem. First is for those who are incarcerated one way or another, to provide services to them, but perhaps the bigger issue is how to divert them from the first place away from a criminal justice mode and into a rehabilitation mode.
That's a good point.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Turn it over to Kimberly.
Thank you, Drew. Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning.
The work under my supervision includes the ongoing evaluation and oversight that JLARC provides for the General Assembly and the fiscal analysis services that we provide. Ellen Miller, JLARC's Chief Economic Development and Quantitative Analyst, will be up in a moment to discuss our ongoing evaluation of the state's economic development incentives. And then following Ellen, Jamie Bitts, our Chief Oversight Analyst, will discuss JLARC's oversight of several state agencies. Ellen?
Madam Chair, members, again, I'm Ellen Miller, and I'll go over very briefly our ongoing evaluations of economic development incentives, which we are directed to do by the Appropriations Act. We contract with the Weldon Cooper Center at UVA to perform the evaluations, and each year we present 2 reports to you. One report is an in-depth evaluation of a select group of incentives, and this year's in-depth report focuses on incentives to encourage high-tech business activity and includes the state's research and development tax credits, and also incorporates several incentives to encourage high-tech startups, including the GAP Funds program administered by the Virginia Innovation Partnership Corporation, which used to be known as CIT, and the state's angel investment tax credits. And then the report also includes a few incentives designed to encourage space launch activity at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport on the eastern shore of Virginia. The other report is our annual report that provides high-level information about spending on Virginia's incentives and also some basic performance information. This year, we are including an estimate of the economic benefits to the state that is generated from spending on incentives. Madam Chair, if there are any questions, I'd be glad to address them now.
I don't see any.
Okay, great. I'll turn the podium over to Jamie Bitts then.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning.
As Ellen said, my name is Jamie Bitts, and I work with JLARC's ongoing oversight of the Virginia Retirement System, or VRS, Virginia 529, the Cardinal IT Project, and then the Virginia Information Technologies Agency, or VITA. This slide shows you the oversight activities that we have planned for VRS. At the July Commission meeting, I'll present an update on VRS and its investment performance. The VRS Director and the Chief Investment Officer will also present to you. And then at that same meeting, our independent actuaries will present the results of our quadrennial audit of VRS. And then finally, we'll provide an oversight report and update for you at the December Commission meeting. We also have a number of oversight activities related to Virginia 529. These include our biennial oversight report that we'll present to you at the July Commission meeting. And at that same meeting, you'll also hear from Virginia 529 CEO as well as their investment director. Madam Chair, we are also conducting an in-depth review of Virginia 529's prepaid 529 surplus funds, and specifically the extent to which those funds can be used to support higher education access and affordability initiatives in Virginia. And our staff methodologist, Eric Beecroft, is assisting with that review. We do plan to present the results from this review sometime this fall. The motion for our review of prepaid 529 surplus funds was approved by the Commission last summer. It directs us to examine any statutory or legal restrictions on using surplus funds, the amount of funds that can be removed from the prepaid 529 fund without, or I should say, while still maintaining its actuarial soundness, and then finally, options for using funds to support higher education access and affordability initiatives in the state. Just some very brief background. Virginia 529 has two defined benefit college savings programs. One is the Legacy 529, Legacy Prepaid 529 program. That was closed to new participants in 2019, but it does still continue to pay benefits to account holders. The other program is the Tuition Track Portfolio, and that was opened just last year. Both of those programs have been combined into a single fund for actuarial purposes. And as of June 30th of last year, the combined fund had an actuarial surplus of about $1.6 billion. Its funded status has steadily increased over the past decade. And as of June 30th of last year, it was at 194% of funded status. Now, it is worth noting that the $1.6 billion surplus in the prepaid 529 fund includes more than $600 million that has been or that is attributable to fee revenue that Virginia 529 receives from its sponsorship of the National College America Savings Program. It's been putting that revenue into the prepaid fund for many years now. And that has contributed, at least in part, to the growth in the funded status. The remaining $1 billion in surplus funds is the result of payments made by families that have bought and paid for prepaid accounts throughout the years. This slide here just lists the four main study issues that we're looking at. First, we're examining any legal restrictions on using surplus funds for anything other than paying prepaid benefits to contract holders. Second, we're examining exactly how much of the surplus is the result of net operating revenue from the College America program that I just talked about. Third, what amount of surplus funds can be removed from the fund while still maintaining an actuarial sound fund. And fourth, what other higher education access and affordability initiatives could be supported with surplus funds, and also how those decisions should be made. As part of that issue, we are looking at options such as scholarships and grants for at-risk students, including students specifically at the 10 non-legacy institutions in the state. As well as price reductions and rebates or refunds, and then even enhanced benefits for current or former prepaid account holders. This slide just shows you the research activities we're conducting for the review. You'll see that it includes working with a law firm to review the legality of using prepaid surplus funds in these ways. We're also working with an actuary to review different scenarios for removing funds and how those removal scenarios would impact the funded status. Madam Chair, I'll pause there if there are any questions related to that review of prepaid 529 or anything else that I've covered so far.
Are there any questions? I don't see any.
Just very briefly on our last two oversight areas, we also have oversight activities planned for the Virginia Information Technologies Agency, or VITA. We do continue to monitor VITA on an ongoing basis, and in September we'll have a brief update for you. And you'll also hear at that time from VITA's new Chief Information Officer. And then finally, Madam Chair, there is language in the Appropriation Act that gives JLARC responsibility for ongoing oversight of the Cardinal Human Capital Management Project. That's a major IT project to create an enterprise resource planning system for the state. We're watching that project very closely. There have been 2 delays with the project to date. Those delays have added a year to the length of the project and increased the cost by $4 million. The project is currently scheduled to be fully implemented sometime this fall, and so we're anticipating giving you an update on the project at the December commission meeting. Madam Chair, that is everything that I needed to go over. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions at this point.
Okay, any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll turn it over to Kimberly Sarte.
Thank you, Jamie. So Jaylard provides some other evaluation support that I will just briefly mention. Starting with the 2022 session, Jaylark began providing racial and ethnic impact statements, which assess the impact on racial and ethnic disparities in the Commonwealth of proposed criminal justice legislation. During this past session, we were requested to complete 3 racial and ethnic impact statements, which we did, and they can be found on our website. And we have actually assembled a small team to conduct these rather complex reviews, and the team includes Eric Beecroft, Brittany Utz, and Mitch Perry. We provide 2 other items of evaluative support. We are currently conducting a review of JMU's Higher Education Management Agreement. We are required by statute to review higher ed institutions' management agreements 3 years after they have been implemented, so that's why we're doing this one now. And this work is actually being overseen by Justin Brown, and he will be presenting our findings to you at the June meeting. And we will also conduct reviews of proposed mandated health insurance benefits if requested to do so by the Health Insurance Reform Commission. JLARC also provides a number of fiscal analysis services for the General Assembly. We provide several annual reports related to the state's finances, which are listed here, and Ella Miller and Nick Galvin lead the efforts for these reports. We also provide fiscal impact reviews. The most common are the second opinions on the fiscal impact of proposed legislation that we provide during the session. And again, these must be requested by a committee chair. After 20 years of providing fiscal impact reviews every session, we surprisingly have not received any requests over the past 2 sessions. So we will certainly remind you about this function next January in case there are any bills that you would like us to review. And Madam Chair, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions about JLARC's fiscal analysis or oversight responsibilities.
Thank you. Are there questions? I don't see any.
Okay, I will turn the presentation back over to Hal.
Good. It's my understanding, Hal, that we do need to vote on this plan.
That's correct. I just had a couple more slides to cover
Okay.
quickly, and then, yeah, that's the next step.
Okay.
The slide 70 shows the schedule for the year. Next month, we'll present the findings from our follow-up review of Virginia housing and our review of science and technology incentives. And then with the exception of August, we'll meet every month for the remainder of the calendar year, and we'll present the findings of the studies as we complete them. Just on slide 70, a few final notes. During the current year, the commission will need to consider assigned work to be conducted in 2023. We'll be continuing the SOQ work into 2023, but no other studies have been assigned for next year. There have been several studies that have been referred to JLARC for the commission's consideration. The study topic selection subcommittee will need to meet this summer or fall to assign future work for JLARC. And Madam Chair, that concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you. So we do need a motion to approve the work plan. It's been moved and seconded that the work plan be approved. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Okay, the work plan is approved.
Next is the presentation of the APA work plan. I'll turn over to Stacy Henshaw, the Auditor of Public Accounts. Stacy?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. Like Hal said, I'm Stacy Henshaw, and I'm the Auditor of Public Accounts, and we appreciate the opportunity to come before you today and update you on some of the activities of our office. Assisting me today is LaToya Jordan, my Deputy Auditor for Human Capital and Operations, and Eric Sandridge, my Deputy Auditor for Technology and Innovation. Just to briefly give you an overview of what we plan to cover today, LaToya and Eric are going to start things off by giving an update on some activities in our office, including some changes in our compensation structure, as well as some strategic planning activities that we have going on. I'm going to cover the proposed work plan for the upcoming year for our office, and then Eric and I are going to discuss some of the results of our audits from the prior year. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to LaToya.
Thank you, Stacy. Good morning, Madam Chair, Commission members. I just first want to start off our office update by proudly stating that we were recently recognized as a top workplace in the Metro Richmond area. This is our 9th year receiving this award, and we are only one of 9 entities to receive this recognition since the program began. We do want to thank all of our staff at APA because we do realize that they are a main contributing factor in our ability to receive this recognition. So when you think about our work plan, we are continuously analyzing our staffing levels at APA because our staffing is a direct correlation in our ability to complete our work plan every year. And so our approved staffing levels have essentially remained unchanged since 2019 at 136 approved staff positions. 120 of those positions are general funded positions, and the remainder of those we fund with our special revenue balance. Those additional non-general fund positions do allow us to manage the increased federal billings of our office that, as you can imagine, have increased even more in response to the federal government's spending towards COVID-19 response. And so Stacy is going to get up here briefly and discuss some of that work and how many hours have been added to our work plan in response to that. The only other thing that I wanted to point out on this slide is that while our actual staffing levels do appear to be somewhat stable, that is because the turnover is offset by the new hiring that we do every year. We really recruit continuously all year long, and because of that, it does allow us to try to have some stability there. But as you are aware, recruiting is hard in every industry right now, and we have certainly felt that at APA as well. One of the factors that we are very hopeful that Stacy mentioned will help us with recruitment and the retention of our existing staff is the Committee on Joint Rules did approve our new organizational and compensation structure changes this past December, which we implemented in March of 22. And what that allowed us to do is increase the starting salary for our associate auditor positions. It also provided an additional promotional opportunity when transitioning between associate auditor to auditor. Historically, that was just an automatic changeover that happened after the 1-year probationary period ended, but now we apply performance metrics, and it is a true promotion for those individuals. The last change we were able to implement is to increase the salary adjustment when our staff become certified public accountants. As you know, the industry holds that designation very highly, and we do as well in our office. So we're hopeful that all of these changes will help us to remain competitive when we are out there recruiting, as well as retain the qualified staff that we do have. Transitioning our discussion to our salary scales, you will see included in your packets there our salary scales adjusted to reflect either a 4 or 5% salary increase pending approval of the amended budget to Chapter 552. Those current scales also continue to provide us the flexibility to provide our staff bonuses for exceptional performance, as well as for passing other professional exams that we hold in high regard, such as the CFE Certified Fraud Examiner or CGFM Certified Government Financial Manager. This is just a slide that shows you what's already in your packet, and the only thing that I feel we need to point out here is at that staff position level, that is where we reflect our human resource and business operations staff, our network operations staff, as well as our associate auditors. Just very briefly, before we transition to the components of our work plan, we did want to give you an update on our ongoing strategic planning efforts that did have a delayed start due to the pandemic. We are making headway, though, when we contracted with Enterprise Technologies, which is a company composed primarily of CPAs, because we felt that they were uniquely qualified to lead us using a digital strategy approach in our strategic planning efforts, one that leveraged innovation and technology as a pillar of our strategy moving forward. So under their guidance and with significant input from all of our staff at APA and with the leading of an internally developed project management team, we defined those guiding directives that you see there before you on the slide and have been working hard thus far to implement certain initiatives and identify additional ones that we will conduct under this strategic plan. The first two directives that you see there do center around our overall work culture at APA. It focuses on introducing a diverse workforce or continuing to have a diverse workforce at APA that is truly reflective of the diversity of the human capital that you see in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We want to focus on staff engagement as part of that first directive. For example, looking at creating individualized career pathways for each and every one of our staff, because we do realize if you can see career growth right where you are more engaged in the work that you are doing. Another thing that we're looking at under that first directive is how we approach talent acquisition. Again, recruiting is difficult right now, and so we are exploring how we can use technology more in that effort, how we are using social media platforms such as LinkedIn and Handshake, which is a platform that a lot of the universities use to assist in our recruitment efforts. We're also looking at the internship programs that we offer to qualified accounting students at public institutions in the Commonwealth, and using that as a means to introduce them to government in general, as well as providing them an opportunity to use their accounting courses that they're studying for. Under that second directive there, I mentioned that we're trying to continue to leverage innovation and technology in our audit approach. And one of the ways that we can effectively do that is by knowledge sharing amongst our auditors. And so we want every auditor at APA to have a base level knowledge in the use of technology and an innovative audit approach, because we realize it will make the work that we do more effective and efficient. One of the items that we implemented under this directive is the use of Checkpoint Learning, which is a Thomson Reuters online resource for tracking continual professional education hours, as well as it offers training as well. So we are really excited about what we're doing under these two directives. And I'll pause now for any questions.
Are there questions?
All right, I'll turn it over to Eric.
I'm sorry,
Oh.
Madam Chair, real quick.
Yes, Senator McBride.
Just one quick question on the internship. Do you offer paid internship programs?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Eric.
Thank you, LaToya. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Commission.
Good morning.
So to touch base on the remaining three directives of our strategic plan, the first directive that you see on the screen here, directive number 3, relates to our engagement with our external stakeholders. And this is really how do we get the information about the work that we do out into the world so that citizens and legislators and those that would be interested in how government runs in Virginia can access that information. And so one of the primary things we're looking at there is how we interact on social media, how we put information out into the world on our website. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. And the remaining two directives here focus on how we're leveraging technology to either strengthen our internal operations, including the administrative function in our office, as well as audit quality and project quality in terms of how we're actually completing the work that we do, the most important deliverable in our office, which is audit reports. So I mentioned the APA website. We've recently come to an agreement with DLAS on a partnership there to revamp the APA website. And so we're excited about bringing that a little more current and hopefully adding some functionality in terms of our existing reports library in ways that data can be accessed by a user and used more productively. And so right now, our database is It's fairly outdated in the sense that you can access all of our reports out there, but there isn't a lot of functionality in terms of comparing reports to one another or filtering. And so this revisit of our website will address some of those issues that we have with the current website. Additionally, as LaToya mentioned, and she talks a little bit about knowledge sharing in our office, one of the things that's crucial for us in maintaining our workforce is expanding our auditors' capability with regard to data analytics. We have a lot of data in our office, and there are a lot of data products out there. And so we have a pilot program that's ongoing related to data analytics training. We have 10 auditors that are going through it right now. We have to kind of create a custom track that is applicable to the work that we do. And so we're working through different trainings right now that will help us do that to create a training program that's applicable across the board in our office. We have a newly stood up software sandbox where we're testing different products. This allows us to test software solutions in a secure environment that's segregated on our network. There's a lot of interesting products out there in terms of programming languages and data analytics functionality, but some of it is open source. And so in order for us to assess whether those products are safe and that we want to use those, it's important for us to test those first. So that's something that's ongoing in our office. And lastly, as part of our strategic plan, and something that we've already started, is we're now leveraging robotic process automation on a lot of our administrative capabilities. This was something that we started at the beginning of the fiscal year, so I think our licenses went live right around July 20th, and we really didn't see a lot of activity until post-ACFR season, so our annual comprehensive financial report that was issued in December. And since then, we've seen quite a bit of development activity in terms of automating some of our existing processes. This slide just shows you a snapshot of that. So fiscal year to date, we estimate about $22,000 in savings in terms of administrative time that is better spent elsewhere now that we've been able to automate those processes. We've saved roughly 367 staff hours in the process, and that's across 7 new automations. And so you'll see the ROI today, it's about 63%, but we expect that that's going to increase fairly exponentially over the next 2 months as we come into fiscal year end. Again, the other piece of that is that these automations take some time to develop, and so as those automations that have already been placed into production are used going forward, we reap the benefit of those savings continually. So we are excited about the use of RPA in our office. Most of the time so far has been on the administrative side of things, but we really want to start to begin to pull in audit-related activities for those routine type processes so that our staff can spend their time on more value-added activities. And so if you look here, this is just a summary of some projects we've implemented to date. And I'll touch briefly on the last one. We haven't gone live with that particular project yet, but essentially we are automating some of the production of our local government comparative report process and taking all this information that we receive on local government transmittal forms and pulling that together. One incidental benefit of us automating this process is that it will make it much easier for us to export data to provide it to others in the future for a given fiscal year across many different localities. I will stop here. I'll turn it back over to Stacy to discuss our proposed 2023 work plan.
Thank you. So the work that we're proposing today is work that we'll perform primarily during fiscal year 2023. We don't have a lot of flexibility in our work plan. Most of the work that we do is pretty consistent from year to year, and it's mandated by the Code of Virginia. That includes the audit of the state's financial statements, the single audit of federal funds, as well as other mandatory projects like the audit of the Commonwealth's 4-year higher education institutions. And so that takes a significant amount of time for us to do that work. And what we have left, the time that we have left with our resources, we use a risk-based approach to determine the remaining projects to perform. And so the main flexibility, the main variation in our work plan from year to year is more a function of the work that's required to complete the mandatory projects. So for the upcoming year, we're proposing to spend approximately 152,000 hours in our work plan, and that's over a 4,000 hour increase from the prior year. And these increases are primarily related to our higher education institution audits, as well as the Finance and Health and Human Resource Secretariat area. And there are really two main drivers here, and that's the additional COVID-related funding that the Commonwealth's received that we have to audit for our single audit. And then we have a lot more higher education institutions that are undergoing reaccreditation reviews this year. And so that there's additional work we have to perform, especially at the community college when they undergo those reviews. And just to give some perspective on the work that we do with these hours, we issue approximately 100 audit reports over state agencies and institutions, and over 400 reports over the Commonwealth's judicial system and local government constitutional officers that collect state funds. So there's a lot of reports that are coming out of our office in an annual work plan. This slide gives you an overview of our hours by function, and I'm going to cover special projects and executive departments and cycled agencies on additional slides. And so here I'll just touch base on the remaining areas. For independent agencies, these are the financial statement audits that we perform over the Virginia Retirement System, the lottery, and the Alcoholic Beverage Control Authority. And so those are financial statement authorities. And I'll just mention the bulk of the hours here are for VRS, and that work that we do also helps support locality audits because of the pension data and OPIP data that we audit and is provided to them. On the judicial area, the judicial and local government area, this is the work that we do to pull together the local government comparative report, as well as audit the Commonwealth's judicial system. These hours have gone down about 1,400 hours from the prior year, and if you looked at a trend, we have continuously reduced our hours in that area, and part of the reason for that is as we implement more data analysis that, like Eric talked about earlier, and are able to also do our work more efficiently by looking at different products. For example, we have transitioned some courts into an internal control questionnaire review, and so if they're lower risk, we're able to go in and do a higher level review for those entities. Another thing that helped us was because of the pandemic, a lot of the courts that maybe were resistant to providing information to us remotely in the past have been more open to that. And as you can imagine, the court system in the Commonwealth is geographically spread out, and so there was a lot of travel time for our auditors, even though we have them spread out across the Commonwealth. And so we've had an added benefit of being able to reduce our travel time to get to those courts as a result of changes the courts have made. This slide just demonstrates that overwhelmingly the work that we perform is in the executive branch of government. So it's the executive piece there as well as the cycled agency piece. So it's over 81% of our hours that we're budgeting. And the other thing I'll point out is that really the only flexibility that we have is in our special projects and in which cycled agencies to audit annually. And so that's less than 10% of our budget. Like I said, the top area is executive departments. We're proposing approximately 113,000 hours this year, and that's 6,000 hours greater than the prior year. And the drivers there, like I said earlier, are our higher education institution audits and the Finance and Health and Human Resources Secretariats. And so we spend over half of our work plan in the executive branch auditing the Commonwealth's higher education institutions, and so those are financial statement audits, and we use AICPA standards as well as government auditing standards to perform those audits. That also includes work we perform related to NCAA programs that they're required to have those reviews in order to participate in those programs. And so, like I mentioned, the biggest driver here this year in terms of the increase is the fact that we have an additional, I think, 10 community colleges that are either undergoing a 5 or 10 year reaccreditation review. And when that happens, we have to go in and do additional student financial aid work that we don't normally do annually at those institutions. And so we have a big increase for the Virginia Community College system. The other thing that I'll mention is that we have four-year institutions that are also in cycle for reaccreditation reviews this year, and that's impacting our work plan in that they're institutions that we would normally do their audits after we're done with the ACFR and single audit. But because of the timing of their reaccreditation reviews, we're having to push those forward in our work plan. And so it's really moving it into a different time frame, and it's been challenging trying to navigate and figure out how to be able to shift those resources to be able to cover those audits. The other areas the main areas I'll cover here is the finance and health and human resource areas. That's about 38,000 hours. And the primary drivers there are the ACFR audit, the audit of the state's financial statements, as well as the single audit of federal funds. And so we've had about 2,000 to 3,000 hours in that area this year increase, and that's directly related to additional programs we have to audit because of increased COVID funding that the Commonwealth has received. The next area that I'll cover very briefly is cycled agencies, and this is approximately 70 agencies in the Commonwealth that there's no mandatory audit requirement. Their activity doesn't generally support the ACFR or single audit. And so in our approach to auditing those agencies is to basically evaluate them based on risk. And so we have two pools, a low-risk pool and a high-risk pool, and most of the agencies are in the low-risk pool, and for those agencies, we select an annual project that we perform over them, and they're subject to review as part of that. Eric's going to discuss with you a review we did over information system security over those agencies this past year. And the high-risk agencies are those that we go in and we do an agency-specific audit, and we'll cover a specific cycle, and typically it's the cycle that drove them into being high risk, and we will issue an individual report on that. We also utilize internal control questionnaire reviews for those agencies, so at least once every 3 years, we go to those agencies and run this questionnaire, have them complete it and evaluate it so that we can make sure that they have good and are maintaining good controls over their financial operations and have sound policies and procedures. One thing that I will mention is that everything that I am talking about today is in more detail in the work plan report that you have in front of you, including the agencies that are cycled agencies and which pool that they're in. And the last item I'm going to cover for our proposed work plan are special projects. And so we have two types of special projects, and we have those that are required, and we have those that we put into the work plan based on risk. And so the first area that I'll cover here is our required special projects. And all of the special projects that we have in the work plan this year are special projects that are recurring special projects that we've had in there for multiple years. And so I'll just briefly touch on the Commonwealth data point, which is the Commonwealth's transparency website. And so our office is responsible for housing that and maintaining the information in there. And so we're pulling the data in and posting it and making that available on our website. The other thing that I'll mention is local government fiscal distress monitoring, and I'm going to talk about that in a few slides, so I just wanted to bring that up there. The projects on this slide are all very small budgets, and in some cases we have to do work in them, and in some cases we're not required during the year. It just depends on whether we're requested to provide assistance, so I'm not going to go into that in any further detail. And the last thing here is our risk-based analysis. And so these are projects that we have included in our work plan. They all have a monitoring or analysis component. And so once again, it's us trying to look for ways to be more efficient in the work that we do and being able to identify issues. So it's following up on fraud reported to our office, doing statewide analysis of data and controls in the state's accounting system, Cardinal. The comparative report for higher education is the time that we have in our work plan to accumulate data for the higher education institutions, and we periodically report on that data. And then finally, we have a project in there to monitor key systems development projects in the Commonwealth and periodically report on those. And so at this time, that concludes my overview of our work plan, and so we have and so I'll pause here in case there's any questions over any of the information that I have communicated. Okay. And so at this time, I would like to request that JLARC approve our proposed 2023 work plan, and also that you will approve our increase in salary scales, which would be based on the enacted budget by the General Assembly.
Let's sever those.
Okay.
Okay. The first one is approval of the work plan.
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded that the work plan be approved. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposition? Okay. And then the next, could I have a motion on the salary?
I'll move to approve salary adjustment plan.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that the salary adjustment plan be adopted. All in favor, please say aye. 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 Any opposed? No. Thank you very much.
Okay, and I'm going to continue here, and we just wanted to briefly go over some of the results from our prior year work plan. And the first item that I'll cover here is our comparative report on local government. And so we published a draft of this report on February 15th, which is the code-mandated deadline. And we are expected to finalize our report in the next few weeks. And so from the time that the localities have to submit that data to us to when it's finalized, we are analyzing the data, comparing it to their audited financial statements so that we can ensure that that data is reliable, since we know it's utilized by a lot of different entities in the Commonwealth. A continued challenge for us is delays from localities in getting that information to us. And it's gotten worse this year. And so we had a trend where it had gotten a little better, and we're trending the opposite direction now. And so as of the February 15th date that we published a draft to our website, we had 27 localities that had not submitted information to us. That's up from 20 last year. We are currently missing, as of today, data from 12 localities, and that's up from 6 last year. And those localities are listed on the screen. And there is a variety of reasons that they've provided to us as to why that information, it really is a broad spectrum of reasons that have been provided to us, including systems development problems. One of the localities had a cybersecurity attack that delayed their access to their system, COVID, staffing-related issues, so they really just run the gamut there. And so what happens when we publish our final draft, what we'll do is, as we get data in, and so usually it trickles in during the year, we continue to amend the report just so that there's a complete picture of the localities in the Commonwealth. And this slide is really depicting most of the information that I just communicated to you. The main other point that I'll make here is that for the original deadline of December 15th, we had 57 localities that missed that deadline out of the 170 that report up for that report. And so that was an increase from 45 last year. And then I also wanted to point out that Hopewell has still not submitted their financial statements for 19 or 20 or 21. And so we have had issues getting information from them for probably 6 or 7 years now. It all started with a systems development project that they had issues with, and then it was exacerbated by turnover in their finance department, and they just have not been able to catch up at this point. And so, so they continue to experience delays. The next thing that I will cover is our local fiscal distress monitoring. The Acts of Assembly direct our office to annually monitor financial data from the localities as part of an early warning system to identify potential fiscal distress. And so there are two components to this system. There is a financial component, which is a ratio analysis, as well as a qualitative component. And so based on that, we're pulling that data from their financial statements for the financial component, and we're running ratios, and there are assigned points based on that. And for localities that exceed our threshold on a points basis, we then pull them in for a qualitative review. And as part of that review, we're looking at various demographic factors and other external factors. And then once we've pulled that information and done that analysis, we assign localities to two categories. And so the first category is that they would they would need further follow-up through our financial assessment questionnaire. And then the second category is they do not need any further follow-up at that point. And so we released our fourth report just last week, and so this actually has 2 years worth of monitoring in it. It had 2020 and 2021 monitoring, so that would be based on fiscal year 2019 and 2020 audited financial data. So there is good news with this. We didn't identify any new localities showing any unexpected trends in total ratio points or qualitative factors. We continue to identify 2 localities that had been previously identified, and so the first I'll cover here is the city of Buena Vista. And so when we were reviewing their fiscal year 2017 data, we noticed a downward trend. When we reviewed 18, they had kind of stayed where they were, so that was less concerning. But when we ran the data for 19 and 20, we noticed a significant downward trend. Our threshold for reviewing localities was 45 points, and they're at 72. So they're pretty far beyond the threshold that we use for performing further analysis. And so, and at that point, we did our qualitative review, and we have identified that that they would, we believe, need further assessment. And so we contacted them in April 2021, and we have contacted them several times since then, and we have not heard back from them. So at this point, we are awaiting to, we have requested to do additional financial analysis, but we have not had any response from them. And the way the model works is we don't go in unless a locality accepts our request to come in and do additional work. And so we are in the process of getting ready to run the numbers for this upcoming year, and we're going to be continuing to look at them and see where they perform based on that additional financial data. And then we also continue to identify the city of Hopewell, just because they haven't given us the data to be able to run the ratios. I will say that we received 2 additional years, and they're identified in this report, and we ran them through our model. And based on that, from a financial perspective, that they look to be, they're within our ranges. But we haven't asked to go in because we want them to be focusing on addressing their financial reporting issues. And so we haven't asked to come in and do an analysis at the city. And so one final thing I'll say here about our fiscal distress monitoring is that we have continued to monitor the impact of COVID-19 on localities' fiscal health. And so there are different things that we've been doing to try to assess whether or not they have been impacted. And so this upcoming report, when we issue our comparative report, we'll transition to doing the fiscal distress monitoring based on the fiscal year 2021 financial activity. And at that point in time, this will be the first full year of COVID impact that will be in our fiscal distress monitoring process. So I will move on and just briefly talk about the results of our ACFR and single audit federal funds. And so the one thing I'll say is that this year, that report had 92 findings in it, and that's the same number of findings. And so those are internal control and compliance findings. They're the same number as the prior year, so we've stayed steady. That some of the findings that we have impact multiple agencies. So if you did the math up there, it's more than 92. As an auditor, I feel like I need to point that out. But and so in some of the agencies, that the findings listed for agencies up there, some agencies have additional findings that are not included in this graphic because the findings don't support the ACFR or single audit. And so VEC is an example of that. We had additional findings in their report, but they were not related to the ACFR or single audit. One downward trend for the Commonwealth is we had 13 material weaknesses, and so that's the most significant type of finding that we have in our office, and so that's basically double what we had in the previous year. And most of that has been with our federal funds and management of the federal funds. And so VEC had 5 of those, and so I don't know that would be any surprise based on JLARC's study of their activities too, and so some of their issues extend to the financial reporting realm and not just the management of the program. And then health and housing each had 2 material weaknesses. Emergency management, DMAS, the Department of Supplier Diversity, and DSS each had 1. And as you can see by this slide, the Health and Human Services Resources agencies continue to have the most, is the secretarial area where we have the most findings. And so typically we divide out our findings into IT issues and non-IT issues because IT issues are usually pretty significant as well. So this year, for the first year in a long time, a non-IT issue is our top finding area, and so that's in the federal grants management area, and we had 32 findings in that area. One of the drivers in the increase here is that we had federal student financial aid in cycle, and we had quite a few findings in that area. And so that did drive it up. And then the pandemic assistance as well. There were a lot of new programs. The volume of money flowing through those programs resulted in a lot of additional findings. And then the other top areas here are financial reporting and human resources and payroll. Like I said, IT issues remain another. We had 31 IT issues, so they were right up there with federal grants issues. And the main point with this slide is just that they pretty much are across the board. This is all the various control areas, information technology control areas, and as you can see, we had issues in most of those areas. So just very briefly, I added a couple of extra slides here on our audit effort related to COVID funding because it has been such a driver of increases in our work plan. And like I said, has been an area that we have had a lot of issues in over the last year. And so just to give some perspective, the federal expenditures that we audit annually increased 40% from 2020, and so that went from $23 billion to $32 billion. And if you go back just 2 years, it's increased 121%. And so we've gone from a pre-COVID baseline to $14 billion up to $32 billion. And this past year, we had 8 new programs related to COVID fundings that we had to audit, and so 4 of those were brand new programs, and 2 were existing programs that the Commonwealth already expended funds in, but had increased funding that pulled them into the cycle. And then 2 programs were programs that were new related to COVID for 2020, but the federal government had identified them as being high risk, and once they're identified as high risk, they have to be pulled in and audited every year. And so one thing that I'm proud of for our office is that despite having all of this additional work in the federal area, Virginia was the first state to have their federal audit completed and uploaded to the Federal Government Clearinghouse. And so we were up there weeks before any of the other states, and so that's something that we're really proud of as an office to be able to do. We know a lot of states look to us as a model, and because we get ours out early and in terms of reporting issues and knowing that so many things have been changing in this environment, they've looked to our office to as an example for them. And so, like I said, I just wanted to take that opportunity to let you guys know that we had achieved that for the last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's great to know.
And the last thing that I'll do before letting Eric wrap it up is just this last slide, once again, is just demonstrating the impact of additional COVID funding on our work plan. And the way we have to audit federal funds is they're considered, you have major programs, and so the federal guidance that's out there is guidance that became effective in 2016. So you have a 3-year cycle that we audit all of the federal major programs on. And so traditionally they would have to be audited once over the cycle unless they have a material weakness. And so that first set of columns is a bar graph, is the baseline years for our cycle. And so you can see most of the programs would be in the first year, and then it trickles down. And so that second set of bars there is 19, 20, and 21. So you have years 1 and year 2 of the pandemic. So you can see the additional programs where typically we would be going down, the additional programs that we've had to pull in and audit because of the additional funding. And then we're starting this next cycle, and as you can see, the first year, and this is our upcoming work plan year, we have a lot of additional major programs that are going to be in cycle. Some of the reason for this is those material weaknesses that I mentioned to you earlier. And so once you have a material weakness, it keeps being pulled into the cycle. And we really don't know at this point in time what the audit effort will be for 2023 and 2024, just because of all the pending guidance out there. The federal government are constantly updating guidance related to this. And so this was just trying to show some of that impact. And at this point, if there aren't any questions, I'm going to let Eric wrap things up, going over two more areas for our audits. Yep.
Yes, ma'am. I know that you are doing audits. And when these localities, maybe you can help me understand something, when these localities come and tell you they're not going to be forthcoming with some of their paperwork, and some of them evidently haven't been for years, how could that possibly impact the state? I know that we had a locality years ago. I think we actually had to pay to put a comptroller in there to look and see. And I didn't know if this was a big deal, and if it isn't, okay, how do we fix it? If it is a big deal, what kind of leverage would you like for us as a legislature to exercise over these folks?
So one of the primary impacts right now for them not to submit information to us is us being able to pull together reports and complete monitoring for the Commonwealth. And so from a financial perspective, I think if some of it is just that they're delayed and not that they're having fiscal issues in terms of being able to appropriately spend funds that are passed down from the Commonwealth to the localities, if they're having those types of issues, I think that would be something that would be more significant. And I don't believe we've seen a significant trend in terms of the number of audit findings that their auditors have found when they're out there doing the audit. And so right now, I think the primary impact is just not being able to assess their financial health because we can't roll them into our reporting process, and then also not making data available to different groups that utilize that comparative report in being able to determine the funding at the local level. And like I said, there's several groups that we know rely on that data, and Eric mentioned, we get requests for it all the time. And so being able to provide that data to state agencies and other groups that utilize it is something that is a challenge when they're not reporting it to us timely.
I'd like to follow up on Delegate Knight's question and ask, so what's the stick? Do we have any stick?
And so, well, I know we don't have a stick, and that's one of the things that we always say is that we don't really have a stick. And so I think that would have to be something that the General Assembly would have to determine what would be appropriate from that perspective, and being able to compel them to appropriately dedicate the resources to pulling that information together. And so I know this has come up a lot over the years, and not too long ago, the General Assembly enacted legislation that if they're late, they have to at least own up to it and post a letter to their website so that everyone knows they're late submitting information to us, and indicate why they're late. And so that was something that was enacted probably 5 or 6 years ago, I think, the requirement to do that. And so, and
are they doing it?
yes. And so this year, the 12 localities that have not submitted anything, all of them have submitted their letter to us, and they have posted that information to their websites. And so we do follow up to make sure that they do that. And so that at least lets their citizens know as well that they haven't completed some required reporting at the state level. And I guess at one point there was some discussion of penalties, but some of these localities are ones that would hurt them and make it worse. And so that's where it's kind of a tightrope that you're walking on in terms of trying to figure out what the issues are and how to address them.
Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the work. And are most of the locality data based on annual CAFR reports that they're not getting, or there's supplement on above CAFR reports?
So they have to submit their ACFR reports to us, but there's also data transmittal forms that they submit, because a lot of the information in their financial statements is not in a form that is what we utilize to pull that into our comparative report. And so there is additional information they submit to us. Now, I will say the additional information, they're less delayed in getting that to us. It seems to be their audit of their financial statements. And so if back on one of the slides where I had the table, we break it down into submitting their audited financial statements and their transmittal forms to us, and less are delayed with the transmittal forms and so that's a little bit easier for them to pull together than the audited financial statements.
One more follow-up, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I'll be brief because I know we're running long on our time, but this is an important subject that I think the General Assembly is going to keep coming back to. I think it wouldn't be true that to some extent the annual issues, and I've been tracking them over the last couple of years, are sort of symptomatic of other things that the General Assembly probably should think about. We often decide to interject ourselves in things that go to the Commission on Local Government in terms of reversion. We do lots of things. Obviously, our counties are set up based on a horse ride to the courthouse. That's geographically how we're set up. Not probably the most efficient thing to do. But I think there are some struggles. Obviously, it delves into the realm of politics, and towns and cities. Cities are supposed to be independent actors of the state, and counties is sort of dependent upon the state. I'm not sure when Fairfax County was ever dependent on the state outside of 50 years ago, and sort of other examples like that. And we structure our code and give authority based on those buckets. But isn't it true that this is one symptom of, I think, underlying policy issues that the General Assembly should probably consider?
I will say one driver here is the standards that the localities have to follow when they're preparing their financial statements. And so they have continued to change. And, just a few years ago, having to add the pension data and OPEB data. And last year, there was a new standard, and I know a couple of the localities related to fiduciary activities that was a little challenging for them. And then this upcoming year, we have leases, and so there's a new standard that is going to change the way leases are reported in financial statements. And so a lot of them do not have a lot of resources in the accounting and financial reporting area, and they rely on firms to help them prepare their financial statements. And so with so much work out there for the firms, I think some of the issues too are the firms aren't able to get there early enough to help them prepare those statements. And so, so a lot of times it's a resource issue in that area.
Okay.
And I know we're running over, so I'm going to let Eric just cover a few remaining.
So as Stacy mentioned earlier, information security continues to be an area excuse me, where we have a lot of issues across the board. And we did do a study this year that covered our Pool 1 cycled agencies over information security. We did work at 19 agencies across a number of control areas. This chart, which might be a little confusing, but I'll give just a brief summary. At the top, those are the agencies that were deemed to have adequate control over information security across those control families. So you'll see we had 2 agencies where 7 of 7 areas were adequate, 1 agency where 6 of 7 areas were adequate, all the way down to the bottom where we have 11 where 3 or fewer of the control families were deemed to be adequate. So in terms of the content of those findings, you'll see that a lot of those relate to adequate policies and procedures and the risk management and contingency planning process and documentation. Also, access control remains an issue across the board. And then audit logging, which is essentially tracking the activity of those with elevated user privileges in the system, how that's being performed. And so what we see as a general cause, as you might expect, is it can be hard to recruit and retain IT staff, particularly the information security area. Many of our agencies have very small information security programs in terms of the number of people that carry out those functions. And so they're often prioritizing their activities. And what you see is that policies and procedures tend to be out of date. They don't always have adequate risk management and contingency planning in place. And so, like I said, that report is out there on our website. It's fairly lengthy since we went to 19 agencies. But you see the same types of issues if you look at our higher education reports, and they have certainly a robust staff at most of our institutions there as well. So it is a complex area, and I think we're all aware of risk as it relates to information security. With regard to higher ed, just touching on this briefly, our annual work plan, we cover UVA, Virginia Tech, VCU in the fall each year, the remaining institutions generally in the winter and spring. We also did pick up, as part of our single audit of federal funds, the student financial aid cluster. This is federal financial aid as part of the single audit, and the Education Stabilization Fund, which was created as part of the CARES Act and funds the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. So pointing out at a 50,000-foot view here, we had no material weaknesses this year. We did have some in the previous year, so that's an improvement. The total number of findings has increased over prior years, so you'll see we had 152 significant deficiencies across 20 institutions. I will point out that many of those relate to different financial aid work that we have performed on a cyclical basis. So there is some skew to those numbers if you were to compare those to the prior year's work. In terms of what that looks like, you see that top bar is student financial aid. So 79 findings and recommendations related to financial aid. Some of that work was in support of the single audit, the federal financial aid that we pick up at our 11 largest institutions. Some of that work was in support of reaffirmation of accreditation. And then that second major area is system security at 33. So then you see it falls off from there, but those are the 2 big areas where we had many different findings. In terms of financial aid, you might ask, what are the findings in financial aid? And I do want to point out, because I think this is somewhat important here, is that there are a lot of rules around federal financial aid, and the awarding process for federal financial aid is highly federal system driven. And so most of these findings up here do not relate to what we call question costs, where institutions are actually over awarding or miscalculating financial aid. There's, from time to time, we do run into that. Usually it's small. Most of these issues relate to reporting or compliance with certain timing requirements. For example, enrollment reporting, when students change statuses from full-time to part-time, or when they withdraw, all that information has to go to the federal government. There are timing requirements for returning unclaimed aid if a student or a parent does not cash a check that they receive. There are timing requirements related to exit counseling and notifications to students about the right to cancel a loan or a disbursement. And those are the areas where we typically find a lot of noncompliance. And that, it's, like I said, a compliance-heavy area. There is not a ton of overlap in the federal financial aid realm compared to state financial aid, and I know you all have a study in the JLARC work plan on that. We've talked with the JLARC team about our work in this area, so they kind of understand what we cover. One area where there could potentially be some overlap is in the area of the calculation of financial need. And a lot of that is formula-driven based on how the federal government takes the free application for federal student aid, runs that through the central processing system, and sends that data down to the schools to drive the awarding process. So anyway, I'll be happy to answer any questions in a moment if you have any about financial aid. In terms of summary by institution, these are our four-year institutions. I do want to point out Virginia State had 18 recommendations here. Some of these are financial aid related, some of these are not. One thing I will point out is that in previous years they did have a material weakness. They did not have one this year. So things have gotten better in that area. They still have some work to do. But I think overall the trend is improving there. So although that looks like an outlier, I want to make mention of the fact that that material weakness that was there in prior years is not there currently. As you can see for the remaining institutions, it kind of varies. University of Virginia includes its medical center, so some of those recommendations pertain to the academic division, some to the medical center. The college at Wise, that's out separate this year. Usually that is part of the UVA audit collectively, but we did do a review of financial aid at UVA Wise this year, and so there were 10 findings, and we issued a separate special report related to financial aid at UVA Wise. This chart does include RBC as part of William & Mary since they issue a consolidated financial report. Our 2 years, again, you can see a large spread here. I do want to point out that on this slide, the Virginia Community College system has a system office that performs some central functions for it. And so on that third line down, where it just says Virginia Community College System, that is system-wide findings, if you will. The rest are individual, except for the Shared Services Center at the bottom. We go to Northern Virginia Community College and Tidewater Community College every year as part of our audit process for the system. The remaining institutions are generally audited on a cyclical basis. And a lot of that has to do with size. Northern Virginia and Tidewater are much larger in terms of quantitative factors as part of the financial statement. So we have to go to those institutions every year. Again, for Thomas Nelson, they look like an outlier at the top, but 8 of those recommendations were financial aid related. And so when you take those out, they fall much more towards the middle of the pack. And so with that, I know we're over time. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
Yes, Delegate Plum.
Madam Chair, I want to make a comment about the report that we received today. We are a multiple billion-dollar operation, and we as legislators mostly look at items from a 50,000-foot level. Now, we can go to bed at night comfortable with the fact that you guys look at it from the 1-inch level. And the auditor position was open just as I came on JLARC, and I had the pleasure of looking at how that position might be filled. I can't tell you how much compliment I got on Stacy among her professional community. The highest commendations were offered to her, and I think you can see why it is that her staff does such a good job. So while we got some problems, we got somebody looking at the details, and we have an opportunity to work on those. So I want to commend Stacy and her staff for the work you do.
I think we all agree.
Thank you. We really appreciate that.
Madam Chair, that's the end of the agenda. Our next meeting will be Monday, June the 13th.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
I have a
Senator
comment.
Sproul.
I have a comment to make to the panel, not to the staff. It's just to the committee, very briefly. I'm going to ask the governor for review of the harm practice of JLARC. Let me start off by saying, when I was in the House of Delegates, 2 chairmen and Mr. Greer was doing a good job, his job. But with the harm practice, when we first started this meeting this evening, you can see on this side there was no diversity at all. I've been complaining when I was in the House over 10 years ago. I've been complaining to the Senate. Talked to Mr. Greer about it. I talked with Mr. Plum about it. You see what we got here. And JLARC look at other initiatives such as the school and other things as far as the harm practice, the reviewing practice and all. I'm saying they look at everybody else except their own. You saw this out here. Nobody, as far as they look like me, that's what I'm concerned about. I've been complaining for over 15 years to the chairperson, after chairperson, even Mr. Greer, he's trying to fix it, I understand that. I've been complaining for 15 years. Now I'm complaining to you. I said, well, I cannot get no answer from you, no results from you, so now I'm going to the governor as far as the harm practice. And we talk about the diversity of other institutions of this. We're talking about the harm practice of other institutions. I'm saying diversity. Where was it this morning? Everybody out there was a little white. No disrespect to that. It's fine with me. None at all. Harm practice. Where are they? I keep saying the same thing over and over again for 15 years now more. I've been saying the exact same thing. Now I'm asking you, Madam Chair. I talked with Clarence Plum about it. I'm asking you about it. So I'm going to go to the governor. I'm saying, hey, look at the review and harm practice of JLARC. They are not diverse enough, so how can we get it done? I'm not asking a question of him because I don't heard him enough. But I'm saying to this committee, look at, you saw it this morning, when are we going to have some diversity in JLARC?
Senator Sproul, I would ask, and I'm sure you will do this, that when you talk to the governor, you do not imply that that is a position of JLARC itself. Thank you. So when do we meet again?
Monday, June 13th is the next meeting of the commission.
Thank you. Is there any more business to come to the commission?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
10 seconds just to say thank you to Chairman Plum for his previous service of the last 2 years. A lot of work, and Delegate Plum, you always set the right tone in terms of delivery reports and questions and format for the commission and the important work that this body has done. So thank you so much.
Okay, there being no further business, the commission will rise.